Shadow Priest is one of the strongest specs in Season 3 Mythic Plus. It's overperforming, it's pumping damage, and I'll show you exactly how to play it. Shadow Priest uses a resource called Insanity. Most of your spells generate Insanity, and you spend it on a spell called Devouring Plague. Devouring Plague is a short damage over time effect that deals heavy damage up front and more over time. If you cast it again before the previous one finishes, the remaining damage is carried over into the new one, so you never lose damage by refreshing it early. Another passive you need to know about is called Mastery Shadow Weaving. This makes all your spells deal more damage depending on how many of your damage over time effects you have active on the target. Later, when we talk about a cooldown called Void Form, you'll see that Mastery is always at full strength while that ability is active. After you apply your damage over time effects, Vampiric Touch, and Shadowy Pain, most of your Insanity comes from your core spells. To make applying your dots on groups easier, you also have Shadow Crash. It's on a short 15-second cooldown and has 2 charges, so you can throw it at a pack and instantly apply Vampiric Touch and Shadowy Pain to up to 6 enemies. And if another pack joins in, you can use your second charge to dot them as well. After that, you just go back to your normal rotation. This is why your single target and multi-target feel almost the same. The longest cooldown we have is Shadow Fiend, or its other variant, Mindbender, which both summon a small dude that generates Insanity every time they attack your target. Void Torrent comes next with a 30-second cooldown that provides a strong burst of Insanity and damage whenever you use it. After that, we have Shadowy Death, which has a short cooldown and it's best to use to snipe targets that are just about to die to gain some extra Insanity. Next is Mind Blast, a spell with a short cooldown that should be cast as often as it becomes available. And finally, Mind Flay fills in the gaps, channeling steadily to keep your Insanity flowing while everything else recharges. So with all those abilities that generate Insanity, you'll get a lot of it. And once you've built enough Insanity, you'll spend it on Devouring Plague. Every 2 casts of Devouring Plague grant you a passive effect called Surge of Insanity. Surge of Insanity upgrades your next Mind Flay into Mind Flay Insanity, which is a much stronger version of the spell, and you can hold up to 4 stacks of Surge of Insanity. This means Surge of Insanity is essentially another resource you need to manage. You want to build stacks through Devouring Plague, then spend them regularly so you don't cap at 4. These empowered Mind Flays deal a lot of damage, so managing them well is a big part of your rotation. Surge of Insanity is the first passive that changes how we play, but it's not the only one. There are a couple of other passives that also shape your priorities. The first one is Psychic Link. With this talent, every time you cast Mind Blast or Mind Flay on your main target, part of that damage also hits every enemy affected by your Vampiric Touch. This means keeping Vampiric Touch active on multiple enemies becomes very valuable because your single target casts turn into cleave damage automatically. The second one is Shadowy Insight. This talent gives your Vampiric Touch ticks a chance to reset the cooldown of Mind Blast and make it instant. When this happens, you need to use that free Mind Blast quickly so you don't waste a proc. It effectively raises the priority of Mind Blast whenever Shadowy Insight activates. Now that we've covered the basics of your resources and the passives that shape your priorities, it's time to take a look at your actual talent builds. This is where the gameplay really starts to come together. This is the Archon build. You'll use this one until you get the Season 3 4-piece tier set. You can see here that we're picking up 3 idols, and that's the setup you'll run in Mythic Plus. Once you have the 4-piece bonus, you swap over to Voidweaver, and this is the Voidweaver build I recommend once you're geared. And the reason for that is the Season 3 set bonus. Archon's bonus just gives you some extra halos, but Voidweaver's bonus massively boosts your Entropic Rift and Void Blast, making the spec far stronger once you have the set. Don't worry about the switch too much. The core principles of Shadow Priest don't change. You're still keeping up your Vampiric Touch and Shadow Word Pain, you're still using your cooldowns on time, you're still generating Insanity and spending it on Devouring Plague, and you're still making use of the Surge of Insanity whenever it comes up. The builds look different, but the way you actually play remains about the same. Let's start with Archon since that's the build you'll be running first in Mythic Plus. So let's see how it plays. When you're playing Archon, the build revolves around Void form and getting the most out of that cooldown. You start in Shadow form just as normal, but when you press Void Eruption, you enter Void form. While in Void form, two things happen. Your mastery kicks in for a flat damage boost, and you unlock a new ability called Void Bolt. It has a very short cooldown that's a huge part of your overall damage. Every time you spend Insanity on Devouring Plague, you extend the duration of Void form by 2.5 seconds. That means your damage loop isn't just about getting Devouring Plague out for its damage, but also about keeping Void form going as long as possible to fit in as many Void Bolts as you can. That's where Archon shines. It even lets you pause Void form when you're out of combat, so you don't waste precious seconds, making each activation even more valuable. On top of that, Archon amplifies Halo and Mind Flay Insanity, so when you're inside cooldown windows, your damage feels extremely heavy and consistent. You'll also line these moments up with Power Infusion to push your burst even further. So let's go over the gameplay loop. It's pretty straightforward. Again, you'll keep your Vampiric Touch and Shadow Word Pain applied, get your Shadow Fiend out early, and activate Halo. Then use your big cooldowns, Void Eruption to enter Void form, and pair it up with Power Infusion since they both share the same 2-minute cooldown. While in Void form, use Void Bolt as often as possible and spend Insanity on Devouring Plague to extend that Void form. Use Void Torrent, but be ready to interrupt it if you have enough Insanity to cast another Devouring Plague or if Void Bolt is off cooldown. Because we're using multiple applications of Devouring Plague, you'll get some Mind Flay Insanity procs, so use them as they come up. Fill downtime with Mind Blast, Shadow Word Death if the target is in execute range, and finally, if nothing else is available, just use Mind Flay while waiting for higher priorities to come back up. So that's Archon. It's all about stretching your Void form as long as possible and pumping out Void Bolts. Once you get comfortable with that, the next step is Voidweaver. And while the core gameplay doesn't really change, we'll go over the differences. So let's break it down. When you switch over to Voidweaver, the playstyle looks very similar on the surface. You're still keeping up your dots, building up Insanity and spending it on Devouring Plague, but instead of entering Void form through Void Eruption, your main cooldown becomes Dark Ascension. This is a 1-minute cooldown that gives you a big direct damage boost, which makes your burst windows come more frequently compared to Archon. The signature mechanic in Voidweaver is the interaction between Void Torrent and Entropic Rift. Every time you channel Void Torrent, it opens up an Entropic Rift that pulses damage around your target. Each Devouring Plague you cast makes it bigger and more powerful. When the rift collapses, it deals another burst of damage. While the rift is active, your Mind Blast temporarily upgrades into Void Blast. Void Blast is stronger and becomes a priority cast, especially if your Devouring Plague is already active on the target or if your Rift is just about to expire. This is one of the few visible gameplay changes between Archon and Voidweaver, but the overall loop doesn't fundamentally change. So your Voidweaver rotation looks something like this. You want to keep your Vampiric Touch and Shadow Word Pain applied. You want to use your Dark Ascension on cooldown and pair it up with Power Infusion whenever you can. Cast Void Torrent to summon Entropic Rift and spend Insanity on Devouring Plague to empower it and to not overcap on Insanity. While the Rift is active, prioritize Void Blast as much as you can, use Mind Flay Insanity whenever Devouring Plague is active, and make sure you don't cap 4 charges of it. Otherwise, cast Mind Blast, Shadow Word Death, and Mind Flay to fill downtime. An important thing to mention about Shadow Word Death with Voidweaver is the Devour Matter passive. which makes Shadow Word Def extremely important to press if your target has an Absorb Shield on them. This shoots the ability up the priority list even above Void Blast. Now compared to Archon, Voidweaver puts out shorter, more frequent bursts of damage every 30 to 60 seconds, tied to Void Torrent and Dark Ascension. This makes it shine in dungeons where packs might die quickly or where you're fighting in smaller, controlled pools. Once you obtain the Season 3 4-piece tier set, Voidweaver pulls ahead in overall performance, which is why it becomes the recommended choice at that point. Before we finish, let's cover stats. Generally, you want to prioritize haste and mastery, but the exact balance depends on your gear. The real answer is always sim your character using raidbots.com. That's the only way to know for sure what's the best for you. That's a full breakdown for Shadow Priest in Season 3. If you can keep your dots rolling, manage your insanity, and line up your cooldowns, you'll be pumping out damage in Mythic Plus. If you've got any questions, drop them down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more guides just like this one. As always, I want to thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.